The explosion came without warning, transforming the field hospital tent into a hellscape of fire and chaos. One moment, Sarah Chen was calmly preparing surgical instruments in the sterile supply area. The next moment, the world detonated. The concussive blast threw her backward against a metal cabinet with bone-jarring force, knocking the air from her lungs. Dust exploded through the tent in a suffocating cloud, thick enough to obscure her own hands. Alarms shrieked. Voices screamed. Somewhere in the pandemonium, a medical monitor flatlined, its final note a requiem for someone who hadn't made it. Sarah gasped, her eyes watering from the acrid smoke of burning canvas and vaporized concrete. For exactly 1 second, fear threatened to crack through her professional facade. Then her training took over. She didn't panic, she didn't scream. She didn't allow herself the luxury of trauma or shock. Instead, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, 5 years of active combat medical service, 2 deployments to Iraq, 3 to Afghanistan, countless hours spent holding people's lives in her hands, became something other than human. She became a machine, a conduit of pure tactical decision-making. Her hands moved with surgical precision, already reaching for the nearest casualty, a Marine bleeding profusely from a shrapnel wound across his abdomen. She recognized him, Corporal Marcus Morrison, barely 22 years old with a fiancée waiting back in North Carolina and dreams of becoming an engineer after his service ended. He would never be an engineer. She could see that at a glance. The wound was too severe, the blood loss too catastrophic. But she didn't let that knowledge slow her down. "Pressure, stay with me," she commanded, positioning her hands over the wound. "I need an IV line, type O-negative 2 units stat." A junior medic whose name she couldn't remember scrambled to comply, hands shaking. Sarah could see the fear in the young man's eyes. This was probably his first real combat situation, his first time seeing the machinery of war up close. She understood that fear. She'd felt it once years ago, before she learned that fear was a luxury that got people killed. She trained it out of herself the way a sculptor removes marble from stone, leaving behind something hard and precise, and utterly without mercy. Morrison's eyes were wide with terror and shock, his breathing rapid and shallow as his body entered the cascade of trauma response. "You're not scared, ma'am," he whispered, blood frothing at his lips. His hand gripped her wrist with surprising strength, desperate fingers seeking anchor in the storm. Sarah didn't lie to him. She never lied to her patients about their conditions. They deserved that dignity, that truth. "Fear gets people killed," she said, her voice steady as bedrock. "And I'm not ready to let anyone die today." She wasn't sure she believed that last part, but Morrison seemed to draw strength from her certainty. His grip on her wrist loosened slightly as the sedative she'd administered began to work, pulling him down into merciful darkness. She worked faster, her movements economical and deadly precise, each action flowing into the next without hesitation or doubt. She'd performed this exact sequence of procedures more than 200 times in her career. She could do it in her sleep. She was doing it now, her conscious mind somehow separated from her hands, her body operating on pure instinct and training. The field hospital was descending further into chaos. The tent's support structure had partially collapsed, one of the aluminum poles twisted like a pretzel. Water from the IV stands pooled across the floor, mixing with blood to create a macabre pink residue. 3 other medics were working on different casualties, each performing their own desperate dance against death. Overhead, the rhythmic percussion of helicopter rotors grew louder. The medevac bird was approaching, bringing supplies and taking away the most critical cases. As Sarah secured the second IV line with practiced efficiency, Morrison grabbed her wrist again with renewed strength, his eyes suddenly sharp despite the medications in his system. "I heard them," he gasped. "Before the blast, the SEAL operators in the next tent, they were talking about you. They were saying—" He paused, gathering breath, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow cut through the chaos like a laser. "They were calling you something, a name. They called you Phantom." Sarah's hands froze. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone else would notice, but she felt it. A complete cessation of motion lasting exactly 1 heartbeat. One single, suspended moment where past and present collided with the force of a detonation. Phantom, a name she'd spent 5 years methodically burying, grinding beneath the weight of her official military service, her clean record, her spotless reputation. Phantom was someone else, someone she'd been before, someone who'd done things in classified darkness that couldn't be discussed or acknowledged. Phantom was an operator, a killer, an instrument of military policy in the shadowy spaces where rules didn't apply. Phantom was dead. She'd killed that identity herself through sheer force of will and professional discipline. "Don't believe everything you hear," she said coldly, pulling her wrist free from Morrison's grip. But her hands were shaking as she worked, and she could feel sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool night air flowing through the damaged tent. Morrison had cracked something open inside her, something she'd spent 60 months carefully sealing shut. The old life was bleeding through the carefully constructed walls of her present, and Sarah realized with a sickening sense of inevitability that someone, somewhere, knew who she really was. And that knowledge was about to change everything. Midnight came with a summons that Sarah had been dreading since the moment Morrison's voice had cracked that cursed code name into existence. She was in her quarters, attempting sleep that wouldn't come, her mind replaying Morrison's words on an endless loop, when a knock came at her door, sharp, authoritative, unmistakably military. Before she could respond, a young staff sergeant entered without waiting for permission. "Ma'am, you need to come with me. Immediately. Classified briefing, commander's orders." Sarah didn't ask questions. In the military, you learned that questions were a luxury reserved for peacetime. She dressed quickly in her dress uniform, pinned her insignia in place with mechanical precision, and followed the sergeant through the pre-dawn darkness of forward operating base Dagger. The black sedan was waiting at the perimeter, military plates, no identifying markers of any kind. The driver was expressionless, professional, the kind of operative who'd learned to erase emotion from his face the way Sarah had learned to erase fear. She recognized the type because she used to be the type. They drove in silence through the Afghan darkness, leaving the familiar terrain of the fob behind, heading toward a location Sarah's GPS-trained mind estimated to be approximately 12 kilometers away. After 30 minutes, the vehicle stopped. A gate stood in front of them, reinforced steel, guard post, and beyond it, a road descending into darkness. The bunker beneath the command center was brutally cold, reinforced concrete and classified encryption layered like armor against the hostile world above. The air was recirculated, stale, carrying the faint ghost smell of industrial cleaning solvents and decades-old equipment. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead with that particular frequency that made Sarah's teeth ache. Security checkpoints came one after another, biometric scanners, retinal recognition, security codes spoken into encrypted phones. With each checkpoint, Sarah felt like she was descending deeper into some classified underworld, a place where the rules of normal military protocol didn't apply. And waiting for her at the end of that descent, sitting at a steel table with a cup of black coffee and eyes that had seen too much, was Commander James Mitchell. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't seen Mitchell in exactly 5 years, 11 months and 17 days. Not that she'd been counting, not that those numbers meant anything to her anymore. Mitchell was the architect of her former life, the commanding officer who'd recruited her into the unit that didn't officially exist, the man who'd shaped her into Phantom. His hair had turned white since she'd last seen him, not gradually but seemingly all at once, like his body had finally decided to surrender to the weight of classified decisions. His face was carved by lines that spoke of sleepless nights and moral compromises that couldn't be unmade. When he looked up and saw her, recognition flashed between them like electricity, like two operatives from the same ghost organization finally breaking cover. "Sarah," he said simply, using her first name for the first time in years. That single word carried the weight of history, of shared trauma, of secrets that had bonded them in ways that normal human relationships couldn't achieve. "Thank you for coming." She didn't sit. Every instinct in her body screamed danger, screamed that this meeting represented a rupture in the careful separation she'd engineered between her past and present. "Sir," she said, the word emerging as something between a statement and a question. Mitchell gestured to the chair anyway, and after a moment of resistance, Sarah reluctantly sat. The metal was cold against her back, uncomfortable, intentionally so. She recognized this tactic, maintained physical discomfort to keep subjects alert. "Located Omar Khalid," Mitchell began, pulling up satellite imagery on a secure screen. The compound was visible in high-resolution detail, carved into a mountainside with the precision of a fortress, defensive positions obvious even from above. Guard towers positioned at optimal angles, machine gun emplacements, anti-aircraft positions. "He's been operating in the Hindu Kush, coordinating terrorist operations across 3 countries. Your SEAL team will raid this location in 72 hours. High-value target, classified intelligence extraction required mission." Sarah nodded, her tactical mind already analyzing the layout, identifying entry points and defensive gaps, calculating casualty projections and optimal assault vectors. This was familiar territory, the kind of analysis she could do in her sleep. But Mitchell wasn't finished. His posture shifted subtly, his jaw clenched, and Sarah recognized the physical signs of bad news. "The problem," Mitchell continued slowly, "is that we have intelligence suggesting Khalid's security detail includes personnel who weren't on the original target analysis. 4 soldiers, 4 men who should be dead, 4 individuals from your former unit." The world tilted beneath Sarah's chair. She gripped the table's edge to prevent herself from visibly reacting, but Mitchell saw it anyway. Everything about her body language had changed, and they both knew it. "That's impossible," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were all dead," Mitchell finished quietly, and there was something almost compassionate in his expression. "That's what the report said. That's what was officially recorded in classified files that only a handful of people on Earth have access to. But intelligence suggests otherwise. 3 confirmed sightings of individuals matching their descriptions. Voice intercepts that match their acoustic patterns. Photographs from reconnaissance drones that match facial recognition databases. And one name that keeps appearing in communications intercepts, that I know will mean something to you." He paused, letting the tension build, letting Sarah's anticipation become almost unbearable. Then, Captain Marcus Webb. The name fell between them like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that distorted everything Sarah thought she knew about her past. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Webb is alive." Her voice came out as barely a whisper, as though speaking the words any louder might shatter the fragile reality she'd constructed over 5 years. Mitchell didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled up additional intelligence files, satellite photographs, voice analysis reports, financial transaction logs. Each document was stamped with security classifications, so high they were practically invisible, accessible only to people with clearances that transcended normal military hierarchy. Sarah's eyes scanned the material with the trained efficiency of someone who'd spent years parsing classified intelligence. But her mind was fragmenting, splitting between the tactical analyst and the woman who'd thought she'd buried her past forever. The photographs were grainy but unmistakable. A man in Taliban-style clothing standing beside a military truck, his posture and bearing unmistakably American military despite the disguise. Sarah's enhanced training allowed her to recognize subtle details, the way he held his shoulders, the precise angle of his stance, the distinctive scar running from his left temple to his jaw. A scar she remembered. A scar she'd watched a field medic suture during a training exercise 6 years ago, Webb joking through the pain that at least now he'd look properly intimidating. "That's impossible," Sarah repeated, but the photograph didn't lie. "He died in the Kandahar operation. I saw the casualty report. His body was recovered." She stopped, realizing she'd said too much, revealed too much of her knowledge about classified operations that she shouldn't have detailed information about. Mitchell didn't call her on it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, his expression unreadable. The Kandahar operation was officially classified as failed due to intelligence failure. 4 soldiers killed, 2 operatives missing and presumed dead, significant loss of classified materials. But the classified casualty reports tell a different story. Captain Webb wasn't killed. He was extracted by parties unknown. The other operator, Lieutenant James Harrison, was genuinely killed along with 2 support personnel, but Webb survived. And for 6 years we've tracked him. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria. He's been moving through terrorist networks, sometimes as a prisoner, sometimes as a guest, sometimes as a trainer. The pattern suggests he's not being held. He's working voluntarily. Sarah's hands clenched into fists beneath the steel table. Webb would never, she stopped herself. The truth was, she didn't know what Webb would do. People changed. People broke. She'd seen operatives turned before, had seen trained soldiers become disillusioned with the system and step across lines they swore they'd never cross. Webb had always been intense, driven, but also idealistic in a way that made him vulnerable. If something had happened to him during that operation, if something had broken inside him, then maybe. "That's what we need you to find out," Mitchell interrupted, as if reading her mind. "We need someone who knows him, someone he trained, someone who understands how his mind works. We need you to go in with the SEAL team and determine if Webb is truly a turncoat or if something else is happening here. And if he is a threat, we need you to eliminate that threat." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Eliminate. A euphemism for murder, for execution, for the kind of thing that happened in classified darkness where normal rules didn't apply. The next 36 hours became a psychological pressure cooker. Sarah was sequestered in a secure operations center, surrounded by intelligence analysts and tactical specialists, reviewing files on the compound, memorizing patrol routes, studying weapon placements and defensive positions. Her mind should have been entirely focused on the tactical puzzle, on analyzing the raid parameters and calculating optimal assault vectors. But instead, she kept circling back to Webb. She pulled up classified photographs from her old unit, photographs that officially shouldn't exist, shouldn't be accessible to someone with her clearance level, but somehow were in her file. There he was, Captain Marcus Webb, 62, muscular with that distinctive scar running from his left temple to his jaw like a map of violence survived. In one photograph, he had his arm around her shoulder at some classified briefing. She was smiling, young, naive, before everything fractured. She looked at that version of herself with something approaching contempt. That girl had believed in the system. That girl had trusted leadership. That girl hadn't yet learned what she was truly capable of. Sarah deleted the photograph immediately, but too late. The memory had crystallized, become permanent. That night, unable to sleep, packing her temporary quarters like a caged animal, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. While reviewing the compound's architectural layout, she became aware of a pattern. The defensive positions, the room arrangements, the courtyard configuration. It was eerily familiar. Identical, actually, to the training facility where she'd worked with her old unit. The classified installation in the Nevada desert where Webb had taught her everything she knew about combat operations. Someone had reconstructed that facility in Afghanistan. Someone with intimate knowledge of the original layout. Someone who wanted to replicate the environment where they'd trained. That same night, unable to bear the isolation of her thoughts any longer, Sarah made a call she'd sworn never to make. Her brother David answered on the 4th ring, voice thick with sleep and confusion. "Sarah, it's 3 in the morning. What's wrong?" She could hear him sitting up in bed, his protective older brother instincts activating even through the fog of sleep. "I need to ask you something about my old unit," Sarah said carefully, using coded language that wouldn't mean much to anyone listening. "About people we knew, classified people." Silence. Absolute deafening silence that stretched across the phone line like a chasm. The helicopter's rotors thrummed against Sarah's chest like a second heartbeat, a mechanical pulse that matched the adrenaline flooding her veins. She hung suspended from the fast rope, descending into the absolute black of the Afghan night, her boots searching for solid ground that seemed impossibly far below. The compound's dark silhouette loomed against the star-littered sky like some predatory creature waiting in the darkness. Around her, the SEAL team descended in perfect formation, each operator moving with the choreographed precision of professionals who trained together for thousands of hours. They were ghosts, shadows, death incarnate descending from the heavens. Sarah's hands were steady on the rope despite the violent thudding of her heart. She'd done this before, many times. In places that didn't officially exist, for operations that would never be acknowledged. Her boots touched hard-packed earth. Instantly, the tactical radio crackled to life with quiet code words and position confirmations. All elements, this is command. You are go for entry. Repeat, you are go for entry. Sarah's mind shifted into operational mode with the ease of muscle memory. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen vanished like morning mist. In her place stood Phantom, the operative, the killer, the ghost who trained for 10 years to disappear into darkness and accomplish impossible things. Her medical pack was secure against her ribs, her Sig Sauer holstered but immediately accessible, her mind compartmentalized into layers of tactical awareness. She could process threat assessment, casualty analysis, and environmental variables simultaneously, while her hands executed muscle memory sequences that her conscious mind had trained into her nervous system. The SEAL team moved with choreographed precision through the compound's perimeter, clearing the outer defensive positions with brutal efficiency. 2 sentries died silently, their bodies lowered to the ground with professional care to prevent alert signals. A guard tower operator never heard the suppressed shots that ended his life. Sarah moved with them, her eyes scanning for threats while her medical training simultaneously registered the locations of potential casualties and optimal positions for establishing casualty collection points. The first building cleared without incident. Administrative offices, empty storage rooms, nothing of tactical significance. The second building was a barracks sleeping guards who never woke up before dying. Sarah had treated 3 minor wounds, shrapnel abrasions, a mild concussion, and was methodically restocking her trauma supplies when her tactical instincts suddenly screamed danger. The trap sprang with mechanical precision. Gunfire erupted simultaneously from positions that shouldn't exist according to the pre-operation intelligence briefing, ripping through the compound's central courtyard from overlapping fields of fire designed to create a kill zone. The SEALs dove for cover with trained reflexes, returning fire with brutal efficiency, their weapons creating a counterpoint of violence that shook the very air. But whoever had set this ambush knew SEAL team tactics intimately. They anticipated every movement, every maneuver, every tactical response that the SEALs attempted. The insurgent fire was disciplined, controlled, professional. Not the wild spray of untrained fighters, but the coordinated violence of soldiers who'd been trained by the same system that had trained Sarah. She found herself pinned behind a concrete pillar with a SEAL named Tors, a quiet man with killer's eyes who'd survived 4 previous deployments and carried himself with the serene confidence of someone who'd looked into the abyss and decided the abyss wasn't worth fearing. Tors was returning fire with methodical precision, 3-round bursts, target acquisition, suppressive fire to protect the wounded. 2 other SEALs were with them, both bleeding from minor wounds, both maintaining tactical discipline despite the violence surrounding them. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the percussion of automatic weapons, the concussive force of explosions, the screams of men being torn apart by modern military hardware. Then, cutting through the chaos like a knife through silk, a voice. American-accented English, commanding in structure, authoritative in tone, shouting orders, in Arabic, to the enemy fighters below. Sarah's world contracted to a single point of laser focus. She knew that voice. She'd heard it screaming orders during training exercises, heard it whispering tactical updates in her ear during classified operations conducted in darkness, heard it cracking with emotion exactly once, the night before the operation that went wrong, when Webb had sat beside her in a secure facility and told her things that couldn't be unsaid. secrets that had bonded them in ways normal human relationships couldn't achieve. It couldn't be, but it was. Around the corner, stepping into a shaft of moonlight that illuminated him like a spotlight on some macabre stage, came Captain Marcus Webb. He was scarred, weathered. His left arm hung awkwardly as if the shoulder had been badly broken and poorly healed, the bones set incorrectly, never properly treated. His uniform was unmarked, nondescript. His rifle was modified Afghan military issue, the kind of weapon insurgents carried. But his bearing was unmistakably SEAL team. Shoulders back, weight balanced, ready for violence, every muscle positioned for instant action. His tactical awareness was absolute, his eyes scanning the defensive positions with professional assessment, calculating angles and distances and optimal firing solutions. When his gaze found Sarah, positioned behind the concrete pillar, it was like being struck by lightning. Time fractured into crystalline moment. Recognition detonated between them with the force of a breaching charge. She saw it cross his scarred face like a physical blow, saw his eyes widen in shock, saw his expression transform from tactical warrior to something profoundly human. For that single instant, Captain Marcus Webb wasn't a terrorist operative or a turncoat soldier. He was simply a man who just discovered that someone from his past, someone he'd thought was safely separated from this darkness, had walked directly into his nightmare. His rifle lowered slightly, almost imperceptibly, but Sarah caught the movement. "Phantom," he mouthed, and Sarah watched as something ancient and terrible crossed his expression. Regret, desperation, resignation, all compressed into a single moment of devastating clarity. Then Webb turned and disappeared into the compound's darkness, and the firefight exploded into renewed chaos. The SEALs immediately pressed their advantage, exploiting the momentary distraction to advance their positions, establishing suppressive fire patterns that forced the insurgent fighters deeper into the compound. Sarah's mind was fractured, half of her processing combat tactics with mechanical precision, while the other half was locked on Webb's face, on the recognition that had flashed between them, on the impossible realization that her past had just collided spectacularly with her present. The raid fractured into a dozen simultaneous operations. Commander Reeves, the SEAL team leader, split his forces into 3 assault elements: primary breaching team targeting the compound's main structure, secondary element securing the eastern defensive positions, and a reserve element maintaining security of the extraction point. Sarah moved with the primary team deeper into the compound, her medical pack secure against her ribs, her weapon ready, her senses hyperextended to maximum capacity. They cleared room after room with brutal efficiency: bedrooms, supply caches, weapons storage areas, intelligence files scattered across desks and filing cabinets. Each room was a snapshot of military operations. She didn't fully understand classified activities that Webb was coordinating from positions deep inside terrorist infrastructure. As they moved through the compound's central corridor, Sarah was so distracted by memories of Webb that she almost didn't see the wire. Her foot caught an alarm system at the entrance to a basement corridor, and instantly the entire compound's defensive posture changed. Lights erupted throughout the underground sections. Klaxons wailed, and then gunfire, concentrated, vicious, professional gunfire from positions that had been deliberately hidden, waiting for just this moment. A SEAL next to her, Petty Officer First Class Jensen, a 30-year-old weapons specialist with a wife and 2 children waiting in Virginia, took a round through the thigh and screamed. Blood sprayed across the concrete wall, crimson arterial spray that indicated catastrophic vessel damage. Sarah yanked Jensen behind cover with pure adrenaline-fueled strength, her fingers already moving to his tourniquet before his scream had fully resonated through the corridor. She cinched it tight, cutting off circulation to his lower leg, a brutal but necessary intervention to prevent exsanguination. Jensen was losing consciousness from blood loss and shock, his eyes rolling back, his body entering the cascade of trauma response that preceded death. Sarah applied direct pressure to the wound while simultaneously assessing for additional injuries. A round had grazed his ribs, creating a superficial flesh wound that was bleeding but not critical. Another round had struck his tactical vest, expending its kinetic energy against ceramic plates that had literally saved his life. Her radio erupted with urgent orders, Commander Reeves' voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Phantom, primary target is in the East Wing, 3rd floor. Intelligence indicates he's attempting to flee via the northern exit. Can you interdict? Repeat, can you interdict primary target? Sarah looked at Jensen, who was fatting rapidly despite her interventions, his blood pooling across the floor in a growing tide of red. She looked at the basement corridor descending into darkness below them. She looked at the tactical situation unfolding throughout the compound, her team pinned in multiple locations, the enemy consolidating defensive positions, the operation beginning to fracture at the edges. And she made a choice that would echo through the remainder of her life, a choice that would define her in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. She didn't follow orders. Instead, she helped Jensen to a secure position behind a reinforced wall, setting up an IV line to maintain vascular access, applying additional pressure dressings to both wounds, leaving him with written instructions for any additional medics who might find him. "I'm coming back for you," she promised, knowing even as she said the words that they might be lies. "Stay conscious. Stay with me." Jensen's eyes were already glazing, but he managed to nod. Sarah secured his weapon and moved toward the basement corridor, her instincts screaming that there was something down here more important than following Commander Reeves' orders, more important than capturing the primary target, more important than the conventional parameters of the operation. The basement was a maze of corridors and chambers, concrete walls reinforced with steel I-beams, chambers that suggested this facility had been built specifically for something. But what? Sarah moved through the darkness with her tactical light, weapon raised, clearing each chamber methodically. In one room, she found something that made her freeze completely. A filing cabinet, its door blown open by concussive force from the explosions ripping through the compound above, was spilling documents across the floor. Intelligence reports, names, signatures, authorization codes, and photographs, satellite images of forward operating bases with red circles marking specific locations. Locations where American soldiers had been killed in supposedly random insurgent attacks over the past 6 years. Sarah's hands shook as she photographed document after document with her secure phone, her tactical mind processing information that contradicted everything she'd been taught about command structure and military operations. The story these documents told was absolutely horrifying. Sarah heard footsteps approaching, deliberate, measured, not the frantic movement of combatants, but the calm stride of someone moving with purpose through their own domain. She shoved the documents into her medical pack with trembling fingers, covering them carefully with trauma supplies and IV bags, creating layers of camouflage that would hide the evidence from casual inspection. The USB drive labeled Genesis Protocol went into a sealed compartment in her tactical vest, pressed against her ribs where it would be protected by her body armor. She positioned herself behind a concrete support pillar, weapon raised, finger alongside the trigger guard, and prepared for combat. Her breathing was controlled, her heart rate elevated but manageable, her mind compartmentalized into the tactical awareness that had kept her alive through a decade of classified operations. But when the figure emerged from the darkness, rifle lowered, hands visible in a gesture of non-aggression, Sarah felt her breath catch somewhere in her throat. Marcus Webb, alone, no followers, no backup. His expression was haunted, carved by years of decisions that no human should have to make. He was thinner than she remembered, his face weathered by desert sun and the corrosive effects of living in constant deception. But his eyes were the same piercing blue they'd always been, sharp as broken glass, filled with an intelligence that bordered on terrifying. "Don't shoot," he said quietly, his voice carrying that distinctive rasp from the old throat wound she remembered. I'm not here to fight you, Sarah. I'm here to explain. Sarah kept her weapon trained on his center mass, her training screaming at her to pull the trigger, to eliminate this threat to national security, to complete the mission that Mitchell had given her in that underground bunker. But something inside her, something she couldn't name, couldn't rationalize, couldn't suppress, made her hesitate. "You're under arrest, Captain," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Hands behind your head. Now." Webb didn't comply. Instead, he slowly reached into his jacket with deliberate movements, showing her his intentions before executing them, moving with the careful precision of someone who understood that sudden movements meant death. He withdrew a photograph, the same photograph from 5 years ago, the one of their old unit. 12 soldiers smiling at the camera during a classified briefing, all of them young, all of them believing in the mission, all of them unaware that their lives were about to fracture into tragedy. "You were the best tactical medic I ever trained," Webb said softly, his voice cracking with emotion he'd clearly been suppressing for years. "You had a gift for seeing through chaos and knowing exactly what needed to be done. You could save people when everyone else saw only death. That's a rare quality, Sarah, a precious quality." He took a step toward her, and Sarah's finger tightened fractionally on the trigger. Webb noticed but didn't stop. "The general ordered your death," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. "He ordered all of us dead, anyone who knew about Genesis Protocol, anyone who could testify about what really happened. That's why the first operation went wrong. That's why 4 soldiers died." Sarah's world tilted dangerously. "What do you mean, the operation went wrong?" she demanded, though part of her already knew the answer. Deep in her training, in the places where her tactical mind processed information her conscious mind couldn't yet acknowledge, she'd always suspected something was fundamentally wrong about the official casualty report from Kandahar. "It was orchestrated," Webb said, and the admission seemed to physically drain him, as though speaking the truth aloud required him to transfer energy from his own body. "The ambush, the casualties, the loss of classified materials, all of it was planned. It was designed to eliminate soldiers who discovered information about Genesis Protocol. The general had people inside the insurgent networks. He coordinated the entire operation, using them to create an attack that would look natural, that would look random, but that would actually eliminate specific threats to the conspiracy." He lowered the photograph and let it fall to the concrete floor, where it landed with a sound like a whisper. "I was supposed to die too, Sarah. I was supposed to be one of those casualties, but during the operation I realized what was happening. I realized we'd been set up, and I made a choice that's defined every moment since. I disappeared. I went underground, and I've spent the last 6 years trying to gather evidence of what really happened." Sarah's eyes widened as understanding began to crystallize. "You're not a turncoat. You're not working with the terrorists." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of realization, a recognition of the truth that Webb's entire appearance had been designed to communicate. "I infiltrated this network 6 years ago," Webb confirmed. "I've been gathering intelligence on the general's conspiracy, documenting his operations, collecting evidence that would prove he orchestrated the false flag attacks. Everything is here." He gestured to the filing cabinet, the scattered documents, the physical manifestation of years of clandestine work. "But I can't expose it, Sarah. I'm too compromised. I've worked with these people, trained with them, fought beside them. If I go public, they'll discredit me. They'll say I've been turned, that I'm a traitor spreading lies. But you're still clean. You're still believed. Your testimony could bring the whole conspiracy down." Behind them, the compound was coming apart, explosions, gunfire, the SEALs extracting with their wounded. Sarah had moments to decide. Webb suddenly raised his hands higher, his voice becoming louder, more desperate. "I can't do it, Sarah. I can't expose them. I'm in too deep, but you can. You're still a hero in their eyes. You still have credibility. You can tell the truth." Sarah's mind fractured into 1,000 simultaneous calculations. Webb was offering her a path, a dangerous, treacherous path that would destroy everything she'd built over 5 years. But it was also offering her truth. It was offering her the chance to expose the conspiracy that had killed innocent soldiers, that had corrupted the military structure she dedicated her life to serving. She looked at Webb's face, searching for deception, finding only exhaustion and resigned acceptance. He'd made his choice years ago. Now she had to make hers. "If I take this," Sarah said, gesturing to the medical pack containing the documents, "they'll hunt me, they'll burn my career, they'll probably try to kill me." Webb nodded slowly. "Yes, but not before you testify, not before you expose them to the Inspector General. Once the truth is in the system, they can't erase it without creating a much larger scandal. That's your protection." Sarah made her decision in that crystalline moment. She reached down and grabbed the USB drive, shoving it deeper into her tactical vest. She photographed additional documents with her phone, committing classifications and signatures to memory. Webb watched her with something approaching gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing me, for understanding." Then his expression changed, shifting from gratitude to resignation. "Now go, get out of here, get that evidence to someone who can use it." Sarah turned toward the basement stairs, then hesitated. "Come with me, we can both testify, we can both," but Webb shook his head, a gesture so final it carried the weight of execution orders. "I'm a ghost, Sarah. I've been living in the shadows too long. I can't come back, but you can. You can still be saved." Sarah ran. She didn't follow Webb back toward the main compound. Instead, she hauled Jensen, who was still conscious but barely, his eyes glassy with shock and blood loss, across her shoulders in a fireman's carry. The SEAL was deadweight, probably 80 kilograms of muscle and armor and trauma, but adrenaline and years of combat training carried her forward. She moved through the compound with single-minded intensity, navigating corridors still rocking from explosions, avoiding firefights by instinct and memory, staying low and moving fast. Behind her, SEAL operators provided covering fire, suppressing insurgent positions to create corridors of relative safety. The compound's architecture was chaos. Walls collapsed, ceilings hanging at dangerous angles, entire sections engulfed in flame. The extraction point was 100 meters of exposed courtyard, a distance that might as well have been a kilometer through active hostile fire. Sarah ran, her boots pounding against concrete, Jensen's blood soaking through her uniform, mixing with her own sweat and dirt until she was indistinguishable from the environment itself. Rounds cracked past her head, supersonic whispers of death that she registered but didn't process. Her entire world had narrowed to movement and survival. Behind her, the SEAL team was covering her withdrawal, providing suppressive fire that forced the insurgent fighters deeper into the compound, buying her those critical seconds that meant the difference between extraction and becoming a permanent casualty statistic. As she cleared the compound's final gate, a figure emerged from the shadows, Captain Marcus Webb, rifle lowered, hands visible. Sarah stopped, every muscle taut with tension, every tactical instinct screaming that this was an ambush, that Webb was drawing her into a kill zone. But Webb's expression was peaceful, almost serene. He wasn't moving toward her. He was simply standing there, blocking the path back into the compound, establishing a physical barrier that would slow down any pursuit. For one infinite moment, they stood facing each other across the darkness. Webb's voice was rough, scarred by time and choices and the corrosive effects of living in deception. "The General has people everywhere," Webb said quietly. "If you expose this, they'll burn you. They'll say you're a traitor, that you stole classified material. They have resources I can't counter, connections that reach into every level of government." Sarah didn't respond verbally. Instead, she nodded once, an acknowledgement of truth, an acceptance of the burden he was placing on her shoulders. Webb stepped aside, creating a path toward the helicopter that was descending through the night sky, rotors creating a maelstrom of wind and dust. As the SEAL team's helicopter descended, rotors scattering debris and illuminating the ground in harsh white light, Sarah watched the compound below. And in that final moment, she saw Webb raise his hand in a salute. A salute to someone he'd trained, someone he'd worked alongside in classified darkness, someone he just decided was worth saving. The gesture was perfect, formal, military, filled with a respect that transcended the betrayals and secrets that had divided them. Sarah returned the salute, her arm rising automatically, her hand forming the proper angle despite the dead weight of Jensen across her other shoulder. She held it for exactly 3 seconds, an eternity in tactical time, before turning away. The helicopter's door gunner was already reaching for her, pulling her and Jensen aboard with practiced efficiency. As the aircraft lifted off, the rotors achieving altitude and banking away from the compound, Sarah watched the fortress shrink beneath them. Smaller and smaller until it was just a shape in the darkness. Then it was gone, lost to the night, taking with it the last direct connection to her past. She clutched Jensen with one hand and the medical pack containing the documents with the other, knowing with absolute certainty that Webb's choice to let them escape would have consequences she couldn't predict, ripples that would expand outward and touch countless lives in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The next 72 hours were a nightmare of military bureaucracy and classified debriefing that tested Sarah's mental endurance more severely than any combat operation ever could. She was held in a secure facility at Bagram Air Base, locked in a concrete room with reinforced windows and a single metal door, questioned repeatedly by rotating teams of investigators who cycled through shifts designed to keep her perpetually disoriented. They asked about the operation in exhaustive detail, every movement, every decision, every moment of deviation from the original tactical plan. They were fishing, Sarah understood, trying to determine what she knew and what she'd recovered from the compound. They were trying to establish whether she was a security threat or merely a soldier who'd made operational decisions under extreme stress. She said nothing about the documents. She said nothing about the USB drive labeled Genesis Protocol, which she'd managed to hide during the decontamination procedures, taped to the underside of a toilet tank in the women's facility in a waterproof pouch. Her interrogators grew increasingly frustrated with her consistent story. She'd moved toward the basement looking for additional casualties. She'd been separated from the main team during the firefight. She'd recovered Petty Officer Jensen and extracted him to the helicopter. Nothing about Webb. Nothing about classified conspiracy. Nothing about the evidence that could bring down 3 generals and reshape the entire military intelligence apparatus. On the 3rd night, when her interrogation team had finally left and a young Marine corporal, barely 22 years old, with the naive idealism of someone who still believed the system worked, stood guard instead of the usual special ops personnel, Sarah made her move. She waited until 300 hours, when sleep deprivation made the guard's attention waver, when his consciousness was drifting somewhere between alertness and dreaming. She removed the USB drive from its hiding place with movements so careful they barely disturbed the air. The small piece of technology felt impossibly heavy, as though all the classified secrets it contained had physical weight that bore down on her hands. Using a small metallic object she'd carefully concealed, a piece of dental bridge from her emergency medical kit, she manipulated the lock on the secure phone in the interrogation room. It took exactly 4 minutes. Her hands were steady, her mind calm, her training overriding any emotional response to the severity of what she was about to do. She dialed a number she'd researched during her previous access to communications equipment, the Inspector General's direct line, a number that was supposed to be impossible to access from inside a classified facility, but which she'd memorized years ago during her first briefing on whistleblower protocols. "This is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, SEAL Team Medical Officer, attached to Forward Operating Base Dagger," she said calmly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I have evidence of a conspiracy involving the assassination of American soldiers, the theft of classified intelligence, and authorization by Pentagon officials at the highest levels. I'm prepared to testify under oath, but I need protection and direct access to IG investigators, not my commanding officer. Not the chain of command, direct IG only." The pause on the other end of the line was electric, a suspended moment where her entire future balanced on the edge of a knife. Then, remain where you are, Lieutenant Commander. We're sending a team to retrieve you within the hour. Do not discuss this conversation with anyone. The line went dead. Sarah replaced the phone exactly as she'd found it, erased the call from the log, and sat down on her bunk to wait. 62 minutes later, the facility's security was thrown into chaos. A team of civilians arrived, or at least they appeared civilian, though their bearing, their coordination, and their absolute lack of deference to the base's command structure screamed Federal Investigation Agency. IG credentials appeared, authorization codes were verified, and Sarah was extracted from the facility with official paperwork that outranked everyone present. Within 6 hours, Sarah was sitting in a secure conference room at IG headquarters with 4 senior investigators, a recording device, and a lawyer provided by the federal government, a woman named Patricia Huang who specialized in classified cases and who understood the extraordinary risks Sarah was taking. Over the next 18 hours, Sarah provided testimony that would eventually bring down an empire of corruption. She detailed everything with meticulous precision: the false flag operations, the stolen intelligence, the conspiracy to eliminate soldiers who discovered the truth. She detailed how Captain Marcus Webb had infiltrated terrorist networks to gather evidence of the conspiracy. She explained how the general had used his connections inside insurgent organizations to orchestrate attacks that looked random but were actually carefully orchestrated assassinations. The USB drive's contents, complete communications, financial transfers, authorization signatures, classified intelligence theft documentation, provided irrefutable evidence that transcended any possible denial or reinterpretation. Each file was a nail in the conspiracy's coffin. Each communication was proof of crimes that reached beyond simple murder into the realm of treason against the United States military structure itself. The IG investigators' faces grew increasingly grim as they processed the evidence. By the time Sarah finished her testimony, the conspiracy had expanded beyond anything she'd initially imagined during that chaotic raid. 3 generals, 2 colonels, and 1 undersecretary of defense were involved in a network that had orchestrated assassinations, military operations, and intelligence theft for profit and geopolitical advantage. 2 months later, Sarah received official notification of her reassignment. Naval Medical Training Center, San Diego, instructor position, significant promotion and security clearance upgrade. A quiet post, a position of safety, a reward for her cooperation and her silence regarding the classified details of the conspiracy that continued to reverberate through military bureaucracy. She'd been officially debriefed, officially cleared, officially protected by the federal government in exchange for her testimony. She was safe now, or at least that's what they'd told her.